I need some traction. You need some traction.
Hey everyone, Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Boast AI and Traction Conf. Today's webinar is brought to you by Boast AI and Launch Academy in partnership with BCF Ventures, Lazarus Institute, and Founder Institute. Fantastic topic here today, and I don't think any of us on the planet could find a better speaker for it, is how to disrupt two archaic industries and lessons learned from doing that. And Eren Bali is a serial entrepreneur founding multiple companies. Currently, he's the CEO and co-founder of Carbon Health and leading its team towards his vision to democratize healthcare and make quality care accessible for everyone. Under Eren's leadership, Carbon has grown its staff sevenfold since January, increased its clinic footprint from 7 to 27 clinics across 6 states, introduced virtual care to 16 states, and facilitated over 500,000 COVID tests. Prior to that, Eren paved the way to make education accessible by founding Udemy. And Udemy is the world's largest marketplace for online courses with over 50 million students worldwide. And in his youth, Eren was a star mathematician, winning awards in mathematics, physics, computer science, and chess, including the International Mathematical Olympiads. And he still plays chess today and he loves it. And you unwind with chess after a long day, right?
Yeah, I do actually. It's funny. I have my rating. So my rating is actually, it goes up if I can have time to play during the day. But then usually I have 3 small babies. I can only play after all of them sleep. So the more if I play after midnight, I start losing my score. Like so, it's like playing competitive chess like after midnight is not a very good thing to do. But that's the only way I can relax after the end of the day.
Awesome, and I think you have maybe some people saying "Marhaba, Eren."
Yeah. Hey, it looks like we have some Turkish listeners as well.
And as I was saying, I was born in Kuwait, so marhaba is a word we use in Arabic as well. But awesome, Eren, it's so great to have you here, folks. If you have any questions, type them in the Q&A tab. But feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're from, what you're looking to learn out of this event, and we'll take those questions at the end. Eren, super excited because disrupting two archaic, ancient industries. Yeah. And getting both those companies to hyper growth, there should have been a lot of lessons, and I'm excited to get into all of them. But before that, how are you doing in Corona time?
I think we are doing well. So the reality is this pandemic has been devastating for the entire world. So you have to look at everything in a comparative way. Comparatively, we are doing really well. Our company, Carbon Health, kind of found itself in the front lines of it. So it has been a very extremely busy year. So like the things you mentioned, going from 7 clinics to right now 30 already. So, and going from 100 people to like 800, those all happened in the last 8 months. So it has been busy. And Udemy, my other company, is also doing well. So I'm still chairman there. So, and I also have 3 small babies. So reality is like we were not going outside anyway, so it kind of didn't change our personal life that much because when you're 3 small babies, like 1 and 2 years old, like so that's really kind of majority of your time anyways.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have 2 little kids as well, and yeah, now we're homebound. Awesome. So Udemy effectively pioneered a whole new industry, right? And has been super successful. 50 million students worldwide. What made you decide to start Carbon Health, and what else did you consider?
Yeah, so I was always interested in education and healthcare. So the healthcare focus was not was already the plan. So and my sister is a physician, so that kind of helped. Like I did a lot of conversations with her. So really, I think I had maybe 8 to 10 different ideas in and out of healthcare space. And most of the time, like my plan was to just maybe fund a company who's working on that field. And the reason I decided to start Carbon Health myself is there were a lot of technology companies in healthcare space, but I was really disappointed that they were all exclusively focused on this young, affluent customer base. there were simply hundreds of startups competing to become the healthcare provider of choice for Google employees. But nobody was really building technology to help provide better care to an average teacher, average retail worker in this country. So, and that was really disappointing for me because those are the people who need the healthcare improvement the most. And in reality, when you provide a better care with a much higher cost to an affluent customer base, that's really a hospitality business that doesn't even require that much technology. The place where you need the technology most is making care so efficient so that within the money already being spent, you can provide a really high quality healthcare. So that's really, to me, like why technology even exists, is like reducing barriers to access. It's not just going to provide a more gimmicky experience to like already rich people. So I was essentially disappointed with the market not having even a single like high quality tech startup like targeting this problem that I can invest. So I said, and I realized this is actually it's a fairly big undertaking. It's like you kind of need the team who is both capable of building a lot of hardcore technologies, but also doesn't mind getting their hands dirty. It doesn't like, because it's a regulatorily complex business, it's operationally complicated. So like for the tech founders who just want to just build some gadget like here and there and do some ML project, like there are a lot of ideas for them, but this kind of requires both like the craziness, the obsession to healthcare accessibility in addition to the technical capability. So I realized that there are really not that many teams who have that overlap. So I decided to tackle this problem myself. And here's the other thing, like, and I also am a savvy entrepreneur as well. I also realized, like, if somebody can actually build the de facto healthcare provider for the mass market in this country, this could also become one of the world's largest companies. Like, if somebody, this is what I kind of told like a friend who asked me the same question. I said, like, if somebody told me that in 10 years the world's largest company will be a healthcare company, I would totally believe that. Because if you think about it, just the primary care business spending in the United States is bigger than the entire smartphone spending. So smartphone has market as companies like Google and Apple, the biggest healthcare company could actually become much larger than Apple, Amazon, Google today.
100%, I agree, and couldn't agree more. And in fact, a lot of my family members are in healthcare. My wife works at Stanford, and you see this is like healthcare is not democratized in the U.S. Like, even if you compare it to like Canada and whatnot, right? So I think it's much needed here, and I can see it happening. And I don't think we can find any better entrepreneur than you to tackle it. What is your vision for Carbon Health? Like looking into the future 4 or 5 years from now?
Yes. So I think maybe starting from the early idea, right? So we are a technology-enabled primary care provider. So we have clinics in urgent care, primary care, we have virtual care capabilities. So if you look at how companies like Amazon, Uber, and Airbnb disrupted their respective service industries, right? Because disrupting a service industry is very different than disrupting, for example, the music industry, right? Because service is a different base. So what they really nailed is using a lot of technology and better operational design, service design, to provide very high quality customer experiences at the same or lower cost with what exists before. But Amazon is both better experience, also like cheaper than pretty much any other way to buy products. Similarly, Airbnb uses all this like the hospitality of a home, but it's still cheaper than hotels. Uber is the same thing; it's better and lower cost than cabs. So first, like we kind of said, our first chapter is how do we provide really high quality customer experience at the same or lower cost to what people are spending. And that's what we have done over the last 4 or 5 years. We re-engineered every single aspect of care delivery, right? So from the first patient interaction of the patient with the system, all the way to depths of clinical decision-making, care plan management, things like that. So we re-engineered everything from the ground up, and we essentially own the entire technology stack between patient and provider. And this actually has never been done before. Like a lot of people have failed at things that look like carbon. That's partially because nobody has really tackled, like undertook, like nobody's really undertook like the entire tech stack from the ground up like we did. And the way we actually started is we opened a small primary care clinic inside the office, and I actually made it forbidden to even look at third-party healthcare software. So we truly started from the kind of first principles in this design. So we've done this over the last 4 years. At this point, like the company's core unit economics are just unbelievably strong. And we are at this like very kind of massive kind of growth phase. So we had 7 clinics last year, and we now have 30. Next year we'll have 150. So we have 120 clinic already actually like lease signed in the process to can launch next year. And then by 2025 we'll likely have 1,500 locations nationwide. So we'll become by far the biggest primary care provider. So we are surely kind of going through the like really rapid expansion. But this is actually what I mentioned, the largest primary care network. That's not even the end goal. So that's really the infrastructure we are building for modern healthcare system. So the thought was that we just kind of imagine what we want the healthcare to look like for an average person in this country, not just for the rich, right? So, and that meant like it's really strong technology around primary care, but also we are building networks of specialists and everything. So it will feel like almost like a Kaiser Permanente, but designed with technology from the beginning. So just we are building an entire network around it. And the primary care layer we are building is kind of like the platform, but then we are building a lot of omni-channel care options from virtual care to at-home care, the device like hardware integrated solutions. We are building more and more video-based solutions. And actually we also building the infrastructure for modern healthcare companies to operate on, right? So that like if you want to build an amazing kidney care solution, you can actually build that within Carbon's kind of underlying essential blocks, building blocks. That's kind of the feature. So in a way, we both provide amazing care directly. We also want to accelerate the transition to like modern care. So like today, it takes 17 years for diagnostic improvement, for therapeutic improvements to go to mass market. We just really want to accelerate that.
Fantastic vision, and I wish you nothing but the best to realize it as soon as possible. But before we dive into some of the more granular things that you've done here, what were some of the key learnings from Udemy that you feel made you a much better entrepreneur today? Because for people who don't know here, Eren moved from Turkey to the US in 2010, and he was part of Founder Institute, and I think that's where you met your co-founders. So literally coming up with an idea, going to sort of like a hackathon style pre-accelerator with an idea and building a unicorn from there to now building another one. Like, what were your key learnings from Udemy? I mean, it's not very conventional, right?
Yes. No, I think probably the biggest learning was really just thinking very realistically about what the real problems are in the world and not getting stuck into like the kind of venture capitalist thinking. So when we first started Udemy, it was a relatively simple idea, right? So there are hundreds of millions of people who just want to better their lives, and learning a new skill is typically a good starting point to just improving their lives. So it's very critical. But we built the platform so that people can easily teach and learn online. And the feedback from every single investor was that it is impossible to build the education business where the consumers are going to spend their own time, own money to learn the subject without a diploma attached to it. So most investors thought this was a crazy idea. Like they were saying, like nobody's going to invest their own time, own money to learn. People only learn because like they have to get a certification, they have to get a diploma. Like that's really the only way to make business. So that's why like we had like maybe hundreds of investors passed on investing in the idea. And even if some of the investors who did invest, actually they actually still thought we wouldn't be able to make it work with consumers, but maybe thought their thinking was like this might actually work in maybe enterprise, right? So, but I think to a lot of people's surprise, we actually made like we built the world's largest learning destination with the exact same idea that everybody thought was impossible. Because here's the thing: so all these people who said like it's impossible for people to spend their own time and own money in learning, this is very easy to disprove. Like books exist, like people buy books and they spend their own money and own time in learning a subject, and there's no like diploma attached to each book. So like to me, it was crazy that they didn't like something as simple as the fact that if this is happening for books, like wouldn't it make sense to have better books, which are like online courses are objectively much better than books or learning a subject. You can put videos in it, you can put articles, essays, you can have a community around it. So like it was so obvious to us. It was extremely unobvious to all the other investors, and honestly, even most of the people in the education space like thought this was a horrible idea. But it ended up becoming like when everyone thinks it's like a stupid idea, and you think it's not, and you actually turn out to be right, that's actually the recipe to become a massive, to build a $1 billion plus company, right? So it's like you have to be somewhat controversial and right in the same time. So, and when I started with Carbon, it was actually a very similar situation. I just wrote an article about that I'm going to publish next year, just going through the details of this. But so even though I had started a multi-billion dollar company, we really struggled to raise money for Carbon Health, because I was starting from the first principles. Like the first principle said, okay, you want to start this from the primary care services because that's a consumer decision. If you want to win a market with better customer experience, you need to be in a market which is a consumer choice. It cannot be just a provider assigned to them from another angle. And then I was very convinced that there will always be a physical component to healthcare. So I don't see pure telemedicine plays ever being like the dominant player. So at least like 70% of the care still requires some sort of physical interaction. And then lastly, healthcare operations are so complicated. Just giving a piece of software to an existing practice is really not going to cut this, right? It requires significant operational rethinking as well. It's not just about software kind of adding to an existing location. So to me, it is and still extremely obvious that you just need to be a full stack company to be able to disrupt healthcare in the way we want to do. And then this has to go for mass market, which means like you have to be able to accept insurance, you have to be able to have physical location, and you have to really improve the efficiency of the technology. To me, all of these are just, again, like I don't have a moment of doubt in any of these things, but it was still like, even though like to me, just nothing else makes more sense, but all VCs, all investors, they hate brick and mortar. Like they don't want to invest in something which has physical locations. So there's still like a really big uphill battle, even despite being the founder of a multi-billion dollar company. Like I just had like investors pass on the idea because they thought it was capital intensive, which again was also stupid because yes, like we had to spend money on opening clinics, right? But in exchange, we actually spend almost no money acquiring customers. Like our customer acquisition rate, there are a ton of tech startups which spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year in digital acquisition to Facebook, Google. Investors just like gladly put money into investors gladly give you billions of dollars to kind of burn with Google ads and Facebook ads. And they thought it was expensive to build clinics, which like in reality is not. Like like opening a clinic less than $1 million of cost, you open thousands of them. Like it's just still not all that much money compared to what you're building. So essentially, this kind of like whenever majority of the people disagree with something which I consider as like extremely obvious, I get really excited because that's really a recipe for a massive company.
What were some milestones you set? Because this is a lot of, I'm surprised actually that you said after building Udemy, a multi-billion dollar company, you're having a hard time raising money from investors. I'm mind boggled here, right?
Yeah.
But so, I mean, that could, as an entrepreneur, that could sort of set you back mentally in a way, right? Like, hey, what am I wrestling against? Is there really something here, or is it a figment of my imagination? What milestones did you set when starting Carbon? Was there like a go, no go time frame, or you're like, no, this is all it?
Yeah, it was all it. Like the thing is, I think between us, the doctors, like people in the company, like saw this so clearly. Like we were not really self-doubting whether this is the right idea or not, right? So like we have such like strong conviction there. And we just made some iterations. Like initially, we were planning to partner with existing practices, and we realized over time, you realize like it doesn't make sense. You have to be full stack. So it was less about timing, but it was more about like the difficulty is eventually when your company is so large, like people who the naysayers kind of change their minds, right? So like Udemy, there were a ton of naysayers, but at this point, when you have 50 million customers growing so fast, like it's just, and eventually they realize, of course, it makes sense to build a massive kind of learning destination. Of course, it makes sense to have everyone to be like instructors. But in the early days, like the kind of this whole like nobody's going to spend their own time and money without a diploma, like that's kind of that type of cynical view, like that it disappears once you are growing fast. So at Carbon, the additional difficulty is that we knew that we can significantly improve the efficiency and quality of care delivery using technology. But this type of improvements that you build, like you see early signs of promise, but it doesn't show up in the unit economics until maybe 3-4 years of iterations. So like for example, the moment we launched, like after 2 months, it was obvious that we have amazing customer experience, right? But then why do you care about good customer experience? You have to just say good customer experience brings higher retention. But if you only launch a service for 3 months and it's a healthcare service, right? So people don't use healthcare 5 times a month. So you just use maybe a couple times a year. So you need to wait several years before you can prove that retention, like the better customer experience turns into better retention. Also, you want to prove that better customer experience turns into better word of mouth growth, which again shows up like several years down the line. It doesn't immediately become visible in numbers. So, and then, but longly, like what is even retention good for? You have to kind of eventually be able to argue that all these improvements you're making is significantly improving the unit economics of the individual physical location very significantly. So initially, it's the theoretical suggestion that you'll be able to improve those margins in a significant ways. But then it took really 3-4 years before like you have all the operations, supply chain, the clinic opening, everything dialed down so much because like when you innovate, what often happens is you build something which is much better in certain aspects, but then you're not really optimized like the kind of other like mundane details yet. So actually you're worse than other companies in certain other kind of more standard areas, really, because like the way it looks is you do a much better job in the things which are hard to do, and then you usually do a shitty job in things which are easy to do. Like you're doing a really good job with customer experience, retention, the technology, like the providers are really loving to be a part of it. But you're doing a poor job with like supply management and things like that, which we not really have bandwidth to work on yet. So it took several years before we just dialed down everything. And now like at this point by 2020, like even if you just don't ever look at the technology we built, even if you never install our application or talk to a single doctor, you just look at the P&L right now, you just understand what did you clear. But that took 4 years. You just had to kind of survive for 4 years until the numbers were kind of undeniable. Like because like when people don't fundamentally believe you have the right idea, you just need to prove that with numbers, and that does sometimes take a lot of iterations.
Yeah, and so the key lesson here is when you're tackling and trying to disrupt a regulated industry like healthcare or education, it takes time, and you got to be patient, and you got to focus heavily on delivering a 10x customer experience, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And the reality is like, if generally, like you do something which is already high, like you build a machine learning startup today, or you build like, even in healthcare, you build a telehealth startup, like there's a lot of hype around it, right? So those like, there are certain things that are like hype subjects. If you do one of those things, it will be easy to raise money, and like the life is not very hard. But if what you believe like kind of disagrees with the common set like investor sentiment, then you should just expect that this is going to be an uphill battle. And luckily, you only like 1 or 2 like backers each time. So like you have 1 investor each time, and you can kind of keep going. So you won't have people get throwing your term shares, and you won't have this ridiculous valuations necessarily like while you're proving things. But none of those matter. At the end of the day, what matters is like, are you right? Are you going to be proved right at the end of the day? That's really what matters. So Carbon, that's what happened. Like it was 4 years of like uphill battle, kind of fighting our way to it. But then eventually, at this point, it's like so obvious. Like now, it's just super obvious, right, to everybody. Yeah, I think it's again like sometimes sometimes you do something that agrees with the common sentiment and things are easy. Sometimes you don't, and like that, then you just have to put on a fight.
Yeah, definitely. And then, I guess comparatively, Udemy, I think by the time you guys were 4 years in, you were already close to 10 million or more, right?
In terms of like the users or revenues?
Yeah, users, yeah.
Yeah, I think exactly. But we were at like 10 million users. Well, it's a different situation, right? So like I said, it's one thing to have somebody take an online course, it's something else to have an actual patient, right? So
yeah, patient, there's further trust, there's regulation, further regulation and whatnot. In your opinion, what are some key levers that you prioritize to scale the company 10x? Like key things you did?
Yeah, I think the most important one was building a product that has true like mass market appeal. So one of the other early challenges at Udemy was that like when we maybe like a year after we started, I think Coursera and Udemy launched, and this concept of like massively online kind of university courses became very popular. So essentially, the super hype subject was how do you just bring the Stanford machine learning course to like and make it more accessible like to everyone. So that was it's not a bad idea necessarily. There are definitely a lot of people around the world who will want to learn machine learning from a Stanford professor. But what we insisted on was like, that's a relatively small percentage of the world. Far more people need to learn some Excel so they can maybe take a kind of office job. They want to learn maybe some amount of like some basic programming skills to work at a local development shop, right? So essentially, the more daily practice, the main skills was actually, it was appealing to far more people than machine learning courses from Stanford professors. So we kind of like, and there was a time where like all of a sudden education was very like unsexy in 2010 when we launched, but then in 2012, 13, it became a very sexy subject, but exclusively around university kind of courseware concept. But we insisted that just allowing average people to learn average skills was actually far more impactful thing to do. And we just stayed on course, focus, and that's really, I think honestly, like there were a lot of growth tactics we applied and everything as such, but really at the end of the day, we grew fast because we had a product that was appealing to billions of people around the world, not just like a kind of small elite kind of group around like Silicon Valley and maybe like other places.
What made you realize at Udemy and then again at Carbon Health that you have product market fit? What are some key things you measured?
I think like product market fit is one of those things where like when you have it, you know it. So if you're not sure whether you have it, you probably don't have it. So I know there are some people like they just say like ask your customers whether they would be disappointed like if you shut down the service. Like I know there are methodologies like these people suggest, but it's actually a little more like subtle than that sometimes. Like because you know that your customers really love your product and they're super appreciative of the fact that you have built it, right? So that's really what happens at Udemy. I think we saw it relatively early on in 2011, 1 year after we launched. When we first started, like people were producing some really low quality kind of spammy course on Udemy. So we did not have product market fit back then. But then we launched a course called Raising Money for Startups. It was essentially teaching founders, mostly like around Founders Institute, how to raise your first angel capital, how to build a deck, how to talk to investors, things like that. It was a kind of really a tactical kind of step-by-step kind of like educated course. And we just distributed towards a newsletter. And we had, I think, 100 people that buy that course at $30. So that's $3,000 of revenue. It's not that much objectively, but I just realized that all these people who bought the course, they loved it. Like we actually we were ready to refund them, and I thought they would actually maybe watch the first section and just say like, okay, this is not worth like $30 and ask for a refund. and nobody asked for a refund. And a lot of people said like, this is by far the best $30 they have ever spent. So that was actually the moment I realized, okay, there's product market fit. People are, I mean, and here's the thing, like the reason I think that was particularly interesting is there is ridiculous amount of free entrepreneurial content already. Ton of people give like really fancy kind of video, like conferences and other stuff like published on YouTube. There's so much free content about entrepreneurship, right? So, but for some reason, people still willingly, wantingly pay $30 for a course because it wasn't the kind of motivational bullshit BS. It was actually tactical learning around how to send a cold email to an investor, things like that. So like that actually just, that like one course we sold, like I got 100% convinced that Udemy was going to be a massive business at that, but just at the moment where 100 people bought a course at $30.
And then similarly at Carbon, when did you realize you had product market fit? Because so comparatively at Udemy, you took 4 years to get to 10 million users.
Yeah.
Carbon Health, it's been a 4-year grind
and
trying to get investors on board. But when did you realize you have product market fit?
Yeah, I mean, after 4 years, Carbon is a larger company, much larger company than Udemy was after 4 years. So technically, Carbon has grown a lot faster. But I think like it was again 1 month into our first product launch. So what we did is like we started a primary care clinic inside the office. That was like the first version of the product. So in 2016 we started working on this. In September we launched the clinic, and obviously like the minimum viable product in healthcare versus education is very different. At Udemy you put some online videos and then you charge people with a credit card transaction interface. That's the kind of viable product. At Carbon, we had to have a physical location, doctors, nurses, ability to write prescriptions, ability to submit lab requests, referrals, imaging. Like it's a far more kind of complex and minimum viable product. But we launched it in 9 months regardless. And like we had both ourselves and our friends and family use the service. And like the moment you use the first version of Carbon's product, it just became obvious. Like you use it and realize like, there's no way I'm gonna go back to just normal healthcare delivery because, like, even in the first version, we made it so that 100% of the onboarding, receiving your care plans, requesting, like talking to doctors, all done through your application. And that experience, the moment you get it, you realize like it was so stupid that we had to fill out these long forms. Those long forms is not really going anywhere. Like they still ask the same questions again. They tell you what your care plan should be, but like you don't even have a good place to reference it. So like these things are relatively kind of simple. At Carbon, the thing that took a lot more time was kind of dialing in the unit economics. So that's not just like product market fit is one thing, but the other thing is do you have a viable kind of business, business because like. It's not too hard to I could easily hire a bunch of doctors and have each doctor see 5 patients a day and provide amazing care. That actually is not very hard. So what is really hard is like having each doctor see 40 patients a day and still be a really compelling healthcare. So that's like when unit economics and customer experience, business, everything kind of like has to overlap for that to happen.
And would you say this is like a 3-sided marketplace in a way kind of thing because you're like tackling the patient problem, you're tackling the provider problem, and then you have the insurers also, right? Like who did you first go after?
Yeah, that's actually a great question because sometimes when people think about kind of minimum viable products or lean startup, they think about only like just launching something in 2 weeks, but when you do healthcare, as I mentioned, you cannot just like launch something like half-fast and not kind of put it out there. But that said, we still kind of got really creative about what is the order of things that we had to prove. The first thing we had to prove was that by using this really technology-driven healthcare experience, we can create a much better customer experience for patients. That was the first thing to build, right? To prove. The second thing to prove was we can do this while still maintaining a really good kind of work schedule for the clinical staff so that they have to also be happy because there are finite number of clinicians. If you're not better at hiring them than other people, you're not going to be able to grow anyways, right? That was the second one. And the third thing was prove that you can do this with the unit economics that actually would make it easy so to be in network with every insurance company. Those are really specific orders because like if number one did not work, number two and three wouldn't make like matter at all. If number two didn't work, number three would still not matter. So we just had to put them in that order. So what we did is like we first built the end-to-end customer experience on the patient side, but our provider side was really rudimentary in the beginning. It was relatively kind of unbaked, unfinished, but it was fine. We kind of hired the physicians. We told them that like we'll improve your platform in the future, but for now, just can you just like, I mean, I know this is maybe a little harder than usual, but can you just get along with it and try to like make things work while we're trying to build the provider side of the platform. But even with that, like we essentially faked the backend with doctors doing more of the work than what they would normally do, just to make sure the patient front end was amazing, right? And then once we figured this out, the next year we spent a lot of time optimizing the doctor's workflow, so we made that work. And when we first started, we did not even have insurance contracts. And also insurance billing is a very complex piece of operations. So it's complex in terms of work, but it's not rocket science. Like it is things that you can do when you have enough resources, but it is very, but it's time consuming regardless. So we did not really want to spend enough of our time dealing with insurance billing kind of problems because again, like it can be a huge time sink for a small company. So our solution was, this is going to sound crazy, but like in the first year, we actually saw all the patients for free. They didn't know it was free. Like we were actually collecting insurance as like, because we didn't want to pitch this as a free healthcare because free healthcare is not going to work in the long run. We just acted like we are going to charge their insurance, but we did not have the capabilities to charge insurance. So we're essentially kind of like eating the cost for every visit. So we're just kind of learning how to provide better care. So once we figured that out, then we just figured out how to then do the insurance billing so that like we don't have to kind of eat the cost of every visit. And then eventually like the operational things got optimized. So it was just like a step-by-step process to kind of prove each critical. Because you want to start with the biggest risk. The biggest risk is like you cannot improve the customer experience with technology. So we had to prove that first and then provide the workflow and then kind of unit economics of the overall clinic.
I want to get into how AI and machine learning fits into all of this and how are you guys using it to improve better customer or create better customer experiences?
Yeah, so I'm glad you're asking because Carbon Health is one of the companies which actually leverage machine learning AI the most. But we actually don't like, it's not our branding. Like our branding is being like amazing healthcare. It's not that we are like going to be an AI-driven healthcare company, but behind the scenes. So the first thing you might realize as a patient is when you book an appointment, typically there are all these questions that the doctor would be asking you during the visit in the first 5-10 minutes of the visit. So we ask all of those questions to our applicant, to our bot, we call it Carbon Bot. Carbon Bot asks all those questions to you, and it takes all the answers and put into our health record system automatically. So, and the main advantage, there are two main advantages. One is like the doctor did not waste much of time like asking and inputting relatively standard questions. But the second advantage is now we have all these things in heavily structured data form. So we can now use this data. So we have the data there. We also have the previous care platform that our doctors generated. We have the orders they generated. So essentially, everything in Carbon is as structured as humanly possible. So our machine learning algorithms can now do multiple things. For example, they can predict how long the appointment is going to be based on all the information we collect, right? So if you, for example, say you are booking an appointment for a sinus infection, and let's say you're a 20-year-old person, don't have really any kind of major issues, and from the answers you gave about your sinus infection, nothing is really alarming. Your visit might really very well be like 5 minutes, that's all, right? So you don't really need anything more than 5-10 minutes with the doctor. So that might be very fast. But imagine the same visit, you are still kind of sinus infection, but you're a 70-year-old person with several kind of chronic conditions, and you've not been in the clinic for the last 12 months. You have some multiple medications. And then when you say sinus pain, like you might have told that like you are also kind of coughing really bad, like there's some other things that kind of like maybe let's say you're confusion, right? You're like double vision these days, right? So like all of a sudden that makes it a really, first of all, high risk sinus pain issue, but also you have chronic conditions, so you will likely want to like refill your medications today, and you'll likely, because you're not come to doctor in the last 15 months, like you might have other issues that you bring up during the visit. So essentially, this might end up becoming like 67-minute visit interaction with the doctor with a lot of complex diagnostics. So essentially, our machine learning system is the one connecting all of this. We actually predict a lot of these things, like how long is the appointment going to be, what kind of diagnosis orders are we going to make, does the patient have to go to ER immediately? So all these things actually we learn from existing data and we automate it, and that's like a big part of how we make things efficient.
So what I'm hearing here is start with the customer, identify all the manual breakpoints, frustrating pieces of their experience, and remove that piece by piece. And technology, particularly AI, machine learning, are great ways to automate a lot of that friction. And you'll be on your path to delivering a better customer experience. But it all starts with the customer.
I would just add one more thing, honestly. It starts with customer problems, like identifying what problems there are first. And second thing you have to do is like a big part of the investment goes to just having high quality data about the problems you are trying to solve. Like, for example, if we did not have the platform that tracks every visit, we wouldn't even know how long the historical visits were. Like essentially, a lot of the investment initially was, like I said, workflow platform, which knows exactly how long each appointment took, know how long, what type of diagnostic orders we did for every visit. So if it does not have this data quality, you couldn't really build machine learning. This reality is, if your input output data is really clear and structured and like dense in terms of the attributes, it's really not that hard to build the machine learning models that kind of connects everything.
Definitely, I'm getting some questions here on like,
Sure.
what AI and deep learning tools do you recommend, or is that too nitty gritty for this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, like our engineering team kind of makes final choices there, but I think like Spark is the one they use the most. So we're not using any neural networks yet. So like my co-founder CTO is looking at neural networks. It's not, so far we haven't used them, but if you want to use them, I think there are different solutions for that. But like Spark has been probably the kind of key tool there.
Awesome. And none of this is possible. You said it right there, that it's all dependent on the engineering team. So I want to dive into team and leadership. Right? You've done this now a few times. For people starting a company today, how would you build your team? Who would be the first few people to bring on board to help get you to the next step from product market fit to scale?
I think it goes back to kind of the ordering I mentioned. You have to figure out, like, so every business have a bunch of open questions. Like each open question is the kind of risk item. And you have to first decide at what order are you going to de-risk those things. And based on what you're going to risk at this point, you have to kind of focus on different hires. So as an example, so a lot of, for example, people just kind of overgeneralize this idea that you should not focus on revenue in the early days. Like that's a very common advice you'll hear, because you kind of know that Facebook did not monetize for like so many years, but then once they monetized, it became like a massive business. So I think the people overgeneralize this. Like the reason it makes sense for Facebook not to worry about monetization is Facebook's monetization is very obvious. It's just advertising. Advertising has been done like so many times before. Like once you have enough eyeballs, it's very obvious that you can monetize it through like advertising. So because it's so obvious, so straightforward, like it's okay to kind of delay that question to much later in the company, much later in the company's life cycle. But if your business actually heavily relies on this kind of unclear unit economics, then you have to prove those things as soon as possible. For example, if you're a movie subscription play, you charge somebody a monthly subscription fee, and then you allow them to just see as many movies as they want. Like now, all of a sudden, there's a pretty obvious risk on like, does the math work here? Is that the first thing you have to just start monetizing as soon as possible, so you can make like prove that the math actually does work. So it's just really about that. But like you always want very strong kind of engineering, product design, like kind of people. That's always the first starting point. In my case, I'm also an engineer, product person myself. So we hired a couple of really, really strong people. And then I think that the first team was literally, it was actually funny. It was me as a co-founder, entrepreneur, one very strong engineer, one very strong designer, one very strong physician. That was really the founding team. So we started with that. Then we hired an amazing, very well experienced nurse who understood the hospitality part of healthcare delivery. So she had worked at a lot of concierge care companies. So she understood how to build a really high quality in-person kind of experience. So she was really instrumental. We hired people who understand the branding. So again, it depends on, again, like what risk you want to kind of do risk at what time.
Like the hardest thing to do is find good people. Any
Yeah.
hacks along the way running few companies? How do you find these people?
Sure. I think the biggest, the most critical one is understanding that hiring is an arbitrage game. Right? So there's definitely the engineer, like the Uber engineer who has a lot of experience, who went to Stanford CS. So like that engineer is a very obvious engineer. So because it's very obvious, every single company on earth would love to hire that person. So in that case, like you're competitive, you don't really have a competitive edge hiring that person over companies who are willing to pay 5 times what you are willing to pay, and maybe it has like just more things. So the hiring is all about like where can you find skill set which is kind of underappreciated. So at Udemy, I hired a ton of people from Turkey because I'm from Turkey, and like Turkey has like a very strong young population, extremely smart engineers. Like I was one of them, but there were almost no companies hiring. There were no Silicon Valley companies hiring in Turkey. So that was a really obvious competitive edge. We hired a ton of great engineers from Turkey, right? So, and then these days, like now there are maybe like 5-10 companies you compete with, even in Turkey, because people realize there's like a huge pool of really high quality engineers there. So I think similarly, you just need to find pockets of really strong engineers. Like sometimes there's amazing engineers, but they haven't gone to Stanford. They haven't worked at Silicon Valley, like, but you can identify them because they contribute to an open source project, right? So, and they're very sharp from their code. So, but like they don't have the traditional background. So you essentially want to find those kind of gems that most other companies, like that most other companies will not be able to see. And usually one of the best tricks is like, just go to where you came from, like go to your university, go to your hometown, like go find places, go find like people who you can get one-on-one feedback from, but like does not necessarily have a very kind of polished resume.
Yeah, because LinkedIn outreach is getting oversaturated. I like the concept of looking at who's contributing to open source projects. That's great. And of course, going back to your hometown, I think I might ping you after to look at building a dev team, hiring some developers in Turkey.
Yeah. Actually, one of the tools that worked well for us was TripleByte.
Yeah.
So I think TripleByte worked like decently. It's a hit and miss like any other kind of, when you don't know the person you're hiring, there's always going to be like some success rate. But like the advantage was that it works a lot of people who don't have very strong resumes necessarily, but might be great engineers. That was one of the kind of tools we leveraged pretty well.
Awesome. Was most of the dev work at Udemy and Carbon done in Turkey, or has it been a combination of things?
So at Udemy, it was mostly Turkey, and then we moved some of the team to San Francisco, and that was because we had to raise a lot less money. So that was one of the bottlenecks there. At Carbon, it has so far been all like San Francisco based. But in the last, like since the pandemic started, we decided to hire people outside the Bay Area as well. So our team is now going to kind of all remote setup. So now we are actually hiring people in Turkey and other countries as well.
Awesome. Yeah, because I feel like, I guess you guys have raised a lot of money, almost 200 million or so. But like when you're a younger company in the Bay Area, it's hard to have people stick around, right? Like they leave after 2 years if you've not raised another round of funding at an up round, because they're like, what is the opportunity cost of my stock options?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, like getting engineers or like designers, any kind of like product person is similar work with fundraising. Like if you look at my time, like the company is almost 1,000 people company right now. There are a ton of like operations, HR stuff you have to deal with, but still the majority of my time is spent between fundraising and hiring. Those are the two things I spend like 80-90% of my time.
And that is, I think, it summarizes it. As a CEO, you're effectively evangelizing the company and to investors, to customers, and to potential employees and team members.
No, awesome. It's not just like I'm not just talking about hiring like C-level executives. I'm actually like still involved in hiring like designers, engineers, like any in-demand scale. I'm in the interview list just to be able to attract that candidate. So I just told people like, if there's somebody you need to attract, like I'm here to help. So and they use me. Like I've done like 3 interviews this morning.
Wow. So like if they basically really love a candidate, they want them evangelized, there's no better voice than one of the founders.
Exactly. So like that's like still 30-40% of my time easily.
Interesting. Yeah, because people make the whole thing go around, right? Like without people, you don't really have a business on either end, customers or team members. So that said, you said you have 1,000 people here. How do you make sure everyone on your team is well aligned with the broader company strategy and goals? Like, how do you basically train people to make better decisions when you're not in the room?
I think this is what I'm kind of learning on scale right now. So because Udemy did not have 1,000 people when I was there. So in the early days, it was easy, right? So you just have to set up some values and you have to really champion them. So at Carbon, for example, I actually drafted values before I even started the company. So the first one, and the values ideally are not just like things that everybody will say yes to without a question. Like if your values are like integrity, honesty, like hard work, like those are just like bland, like just everybody could say they have, like nobody would say like they don't have integrity, right? So so your values ideally like your style is a lot more like specific to you. So like for me the critical things was one, pretend karma exists. So essentially the idea that sometimes you don't even know what the right strategy is. Sometimes you don't know what's about a commercial idea, but doing the principled thing, the right thing to do consistently will reward you a lot more than any kind of business calculation. That's one of the key kind of key philosophies of Carbon is like really like, you don't need to calculate every move. This is not this is a chess. Sometimes you just like do the right thing consistently, and then it comes back to you like 100-fold. So every person who just Carbon in the early days was really like, when people talk to me, they realize that's really a strategy. I'm not asking them to just put like data behind every decision. So, and similarly, we're like respecting the cross is very critical at Carbon, and hiring people who genuinely care about the problems you're trying to solve. Like those are very critical. So it's first important that you have a very authentic, very specific DNA that is not really something that every other company is going to align with, right? So we are, for example, very intentionally not data-driven. Like Carbon, Udemy was a very data-driven business. Carbon is far more into like design-driven than data-driven. So I think setting those up is great, and you have to talk about them. You have to just get everybody to onboard with those ideas early days, which I have done successfully. But I think as you go from a couple hundred people to thousands of people, you have to do a transition. Now like the values in your head is no longer like enough. So you have to just, now I'm turning these ideas into writing. So I have, this is actually one of the interesting hacks for if somebody has a scaling company. So I have a writing coach. So we kind of meet once or twice a week. So we kind of sit down together and we write together. And actually we kind of make it a regular thing, actually forces me to write. So because otherwise I always want to write something, but I get busy and just procrastinate. But like when you have somebody else kind of that you are hiring to help you, so you have to do like this. So I sit down and kind of convert what I have in my head into kind of actual text and words, and then we may later make illustrations about them. Like so, I think that type of like writing is like, as you're scaling, writing is probably the biggest leadership skill you have to gain, and hiring a writing coach is a really good idea.
I never thought of that actually. I hate writing too personally, and I have a lot of content just sitting there on the back burner and you procrastinate on it. It's not in your head. I should look at getting a writing coach too. Do you have a business coach at all?
I received a lot of coaching in different parts of my life, like at Udemy, for example. I still have a heavy, I mean, especially in the early days of Udemy, I had a very heavy accent. So I took accent coaching, communications coaching. These days, I'm taking media coaching as well. So if I go on, like I speak fast, so like they have to train me to speak more slowly, speak in sound bites. If you are doing a 5 minute broadcast interview, is very different than talking to in a casual manner like this. Whenever I'm like not good at something and if it makes sense to hire someone to help, like I always go for it.
Definitely. I want to take the last few things in sort of rapid fire fashion, right?
Yeah.
One is, what is your biggest fear as a leader?
I think my biggest fear is like, as the company becomes larger, having this disconnect between your people on the ground and your like executive team, right? So because when you were like 20% people, like I talk to everybody like in a daily basis, and now I can no longer meet like everybody or even know their name. So just like having this culture disconnect is my biggest fear, and we are trying to be very proactive about making sure that it never happens.
Yeah, it's important to give align people with the mission and the metrics, and at the same time give them the autonomy and responsibility so they're executing when you're not there, right?
Exactly.
Key skills all entrepreneurs need to have, like your top 3 or 5.
Yeah, I think number one is you have to be able to like see ahead of the curve a little bit, but also be realistic in doing this. Like sometimes when I say like seeing ahead of the curve, what most people understand is like just suggest that everything is going to be replaced with AI and everything is going to VR and AR and like, so like saying those stuff like that's cheap, that's easy. But you have to understand, like what you have to be able to say is like in like 3 years, this type of AI is going to replace X part of that, and this type of companies will appear, like the business model will shift that way. So you have to essentially see what is like next, like 6 months later, 1 year later, and very much in a lot of details. It's not about like telling what's going to happen 20 years later. It's about like what's going to happen like 1, 2, 3 years later in a lot of accuracy. That's really what you have to do. So one thing you have to be good at is like really managing stress. So no matter what you're doing, like taking responsibility kind of like has a toll on you. So I think not everybody's well set up to be able to kind of work under stress like that. So you have to be able to you have to practice working under stress and not losing it. And I think lastly, like you just need to be a builder, right? So I think like almost all the good founders are like builders in nature. So you have to just understand like how to go from like nothing to something. So because that's really what most of what your job is like, taking something which hasn't happened before and just like having an idea about what the first version of that looks like. So that's a critical skill.
Yeah. So in summary, I think looking into the future, but like more sort of granularly rather than high level, and being able to map it today and get the steps there, and then inherent passion for building. In general, I think if you're not passionate about your craft, it all becomes a job, right? And that differentiates from a 9 to 5 to like wanting to do this, for a lifetime kind of thing, right? Like Michael Jackson found his passion, and like, a lot of entrepreneurs find their passion. You found your passion in healthcare. What are your book recommendations? Any favorite books?
Yeah, so this is okay. Like, I think I refresh my memories. I do. I think one book I read a long time ago, but it's still I reference to like Good to Great and Crossing the Chasm. Like those are like definitely like those are like timeless books about business. That I think I'm starting with the technology like startup books. Like I think 0 to 1 is still a great book, despite even if you disagree with parts of that. The Hard Things About Hard Things from Ben Horowitz was a great book. In the healthcare space, I like the Patient Will See You Now. That's a great book. I also read a lot of like kind of I read a book about like how to be a nurse and how to be a medical coder. Like I actually sometimes like enjoy reading like how-to books because it gives you a sense of like what the the fundamental skills are for different jobs. And I think there's a book called The Autistic Brain, which is like very fascinating. Like even if you don't have no interest in like autism or any of those subjects, it kind of gives you a different lens of like how your brain works.
this has been great advice.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. I learned a ton. And it's always good chatting with fellow immigrant founders who are absolutely killing it. And you're also giving back a lot to the community through events like this and angel investing. Wishing you all the best. I am looking forward to buying the stock at the IPO.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
I need some traction.